Grandpa, can we cut the apple pie now? My grandson smiled. I spent days making the recipe my late wife once made for our family. But before he could taste it, my son-in-law grabbed the pie from my hands and threw it into the trash. My parents are allergic to apples. How could you bring this here? He shouted. Everyone went silent. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to defend me, until she slowly stood up, looked at me and said, "Before we begin, thank you for being here. It means everything. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from, your city, your country? I want to know." Dad family revenge stories hit differently depending on where you're from. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and meaningful reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside is something worth keeping. The smell hit me before I even opened my eyes. Cinnamon, brown sugar, tart apple slices soaking in a bowl on the counter, just the way Eleanor used to do it the night before. I had been standing in this kitchen since 5:30 in the morning, flour on my hands, a cracked recipe card propped against the backsplash. The card was yellowed at the edges, Eleanor's handwriting faded, but still readable. 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, a pinch of nutmeg, don't rush the crust. I had rushed the crust twice already. The first time it crumbled the moment I tried to lift it. The second time it tore straight down the middle like it was trying to tell me something. I stood there staring at the torn dough on the counter, my chest tightening in a way I didn't expect, and I thought Eleanor never had to do it 3 times. But she also had 40 years of practice. I had 3 days and a birthday deadline. I pressed the dough together again, slower this time, the way the card said. My hands weren't what they used to be. 72 years had seen to that, but they still remembered how to work. I had spent 30 years laying foundations, pouring concrete, framing walls in the cold Queen's wind. A pie crust wasn't going to beat me. The back door opened without a knock. It never had to. "You started without me," Maggie said, dropping her purse on the chair by the door and heading straight for the coffee pot, like she owned the place. Which in most ways, that mattered, she did. Margaret Torres had lived next door for 26 years. She had held Eleanor's hand in the hospital. She had sat in this kitchen for 3 days straight after the funeral, making sure I ate. "I started at 5:30, I said. "You want to blame me for that? I want to blame you for not calling me at 5:30. She poured her coffee, turned around, and looked at the bowl of apples, the flour on my shirt, the 3 failed attempts of dough I hadn't thrown away yet. Her eyes went soft in that way I hated, the way that meant she was about to say something true. "You okay, Frank?" "I'm making a pie," I said. "I'm fine." She sat down and wrapped both hands around her mug. "You're making Eleanor's pie. That's different." I didn't answer that. I went back to the crust. The truth was, I had been awake since 3. I had lain in bed, listening to the house breathe around me, the creak of the hallway floor, the hiss of the radiator, all those sounds that used to be background noise, and now felt loud as a conversation. At 3:45, I gave up and came downstairs, pulled out Eleanor's recipe card, and started. Noah's birthday was tomorrow. He was turning 10, and I hadn't seen him in 8 months. I had called Patricia every week, sometimes twice. The phone would ring and drop to voicemail, and I would leave a message, nothing dramatic, nothing demanding. Just Dad calling to check in, hope you're all doing well. Tell Noah, I said, happy Tuesday. And then I would sit by the phone for a little while, just in case. Nobody ever called back. You should take the journal, Maggie said. I looked up. What? Eleanor's journal. The one in the kitchen drawer. She nodded toward the cabinet by the window. Patricia never got to read it. You've been meaning to give it to her for 2 years. My jaw tightened. It's not the right time. Frank. Maggie set her mug down. When is it ever going to be the right time? You're flying across the country to see your daughter. Take the journal. I stood there with flour on my hands and thought about Patricia, at 7 years old, sitting on this same counter, watching Eleanor pull a pie out of the oven. Her feet swinging, her eyes wide. "Mom, how do you make it smell like that?" My throat tightened so fast it surprised me. I went to the cabinet, opened the drawer, and took out the journal, dark brown leather cover, soft from years of handling. I carried it to the box of paperwork I had been packing for the trip. Jim had called last week and told me to bring my financial documents, said a man my age should always have his records in order when he travels. The box already had the tax files, the house receipts, a letter from a real estate company in Queens that had arrived 10 days ago asking about selling the property. I still didn't understand who had given them my name. I set the journal on top of everything else and closed the box. Then I went back to the pie. The third crust held. The cab driver didn't talk much, which suited me fine. It was still dark outside when we pulled onto the expressway. The Manhattan skyline glittering across the water like something from a postcard. I had lived within 30 miles of that skyline my entire life, and it still did something to my chest every time I saw it. Eleanor used to say New York was the only city in the world that looked better at 4 in the morning than it did at noon. I used to argue with her about that just to hear her defend it. I pressed my fingers against the cold window glass and said nothing. JFK at 5:15 in the morning was its own kind of chaos. People moved in every direction at once, dragging roller bags, barking into phones, cutting lines without apology. I stood at the check-in kiosk for a full 2 minutes before a young woman in a blue airport uniform noticed me staring at the touchscreen like it had personally offended me. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'd appreciate it," I said. "Last time I flew, a person checked me in." She smiled, not the impatient kind, the real kind, and walked me through the whole thing. Boarding pass, printed bag tagged senior lane for security. I thanked her twice, which she seemed to find amusing. The gate was at the far end of Terminal 4. I walked slowly, my carry-on rolling behind me, the box of documents tucked under my arm, the pie wrapped carefully in the overhead storage of the bag I had checked. I had triple wrapped it in foil and packed it inside a rigid cooler bag. Maggie had watched me do it and said, "Frank, it's a pie, not a newborn." I told her to mind her business. She laughed so hard she knocked her coffee over. I found a seat near the window and sat down. The gate was quiet. A businessman slept across 3 chairs with his jacket over his face. 2 college girls shared earbuds and a bag of chips. A young father walked slow circles with a baby strapped to his chest, patting the baby's back in that automatic rhythm that meant he had been doing it for hours. I watched him and felt something pull behind my ribs. Patricia had been that small once. I had walked those same circles in our kitchen on Parsons Boulevard at 2 in the morning, her face red and scrunched against my shoulder, her tiny fist wrapped around my thumb. I had been terrified every single night of her first year. Eleanor would lean in the doorway watching me and say, "You're doing fine, Frank." I never believed her. Somehow Patricia survived anyway. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I took it out and looked at her name in my contacts, Patricia Calloway Reed. I had called that number every week for 8 months. Sometimes I told myself she was busy, she was a lawyer, she worked long hours, she had a husband and a kid, and a life that moved faster than mine. Sometimes I believed it. Most times I didn't. I typed a short message on my way. "Landing around 10 your time. Looking forward to seeing you and Noah." I stared at it for a moment, then hit send. The little check mark appeared. Delivered. I put the phone away. They called our boarding group 20 minutes later. I stood in line behind the businessman and in front of a woman traveling with 3 kids under 6, all of whom were vibrating with excitement in a way that made the businessman visibly tense and made me smile for the first time all morning. The flight was 5 hours and 40 minutes. I had the window seat. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, I fell into a half-sleep that wasn't quite rest the kind where you're aware of every bump of turbulence and the sound of the drink cart and someone 3 rows back coughing, but your body is too tired to fully surface. I dreamed briefly about Eleanor's kitchen, the way the afternoon light came through the window above the sink, the sound of her humming something she never knew the words to. I woke up over Nevada. The desert spread out below like cracked clay, nothing like Queens, nothing like anything I knew. The pilot announced initial descent into LAX. I straightened up, looked out the window at the brown hills and the sprawl of highways and rooftops stretching to the ocean. Los Angeles, enormous and bright and completely indifferent to the fact that I had never felt more out of place in my life. The cab from the airport took 40 minutes in late morning traffic. Beverly Hills looked the way it always looked on television: wide streets, perfect lawns, palm trees standing at attention like they'd been told to. The houses got larger the deeper we drove. By the time we turned onto Patricia's street, I was looking at iron gates and security cameras and hedges trimmed into walls. The cab stopped. I paid, climbed out, stood on the sidewalk with my carry-on and my box, and looked at the house. It was large, beautiful even. But there were no flowers in the front yard, no wind chimes, no scuff marks on the front steps from years of kids running in and out. It looked like a photograph of a home rather than an actual one. I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Footsteps fast and light. The door swung open, and Noah stood there, 10 years old, dark-haired, gap-toothed, wearing a Lakers jersey 2 sizes too big. His face split into the biggest grin I had seen in 8 months, and his whole body seemed to light up from somewhere inside. "Grandpa." My throat closed completely. I managed, "Hey, buddy." He threw his arms around my waist and squeezed hard enough to shift my balance. I grabbed the door frame with one hand and held him with the other, my eyes stinging in a way I absolutely refused to acknowledge. Then Noah loosened his grip. I felt him go still. I looked up. Daniel Reed was standing at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the banister, looking down at me with the kind of expression that wasn't quite a frown and wasn't quite a welcome, the expression of a man calculating something. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched me stand in his doorway holding his son and waited. Daniel came down the stairs the way men do when they want you to know they're not in a hurry. Each step was deliberate, one hand trailing along the banister. Eyes on me the whole time, not with hostility exactly, but with the kind of flat assessment that made me feel like something being appraised rather than someone being welcomed. He reached the bottom, smoothed the front of his shirt, and stopped 4 feet away from me. He didn't extend his hand. "Frank," he said, "you should have called ahead." Noah was still pressed against my side. I felt him shift slightly at his father's voice the way kids do when the temperature in a room changes and they're not sure why. "I sent a message this morning," I said. "Said I was on my way." A message this morning isn't the same as calling ahead. Daniel glanced at the box under my arm, then at my carry-on, then back at my face. "We have a full house today." Before I could answer, a voice floated in from the living room, smooth and warm, the way a surface can be warm without having any heat underneath it. "Is that Frank? Oh, wonderful." I stepped inside. The living room was large and expensively furnished, all clean lines and neutral colors, the kind of room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who charged by the hour. And seated at the center of it, on the best sofa, in the best position in the room, were 2 people I recognized from the handful of times I had seen them over the years. Linda Reed was 70 years old and looked 60, the kind of woman who had spent a lifetime being carefully put together. Her hair was silver blonde, her posture was perfect, and she smiled at me with every muscle in her face except her eyes. Frank, how lovely. She didn't stand. Daniel mentioned you might be stopping by. Stopping by. As though I had wandered in off the street instead of flying across the country for my grandson's birthday. Robert Reed sat beside her, heavier than I remembered, mostly gray, now the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but strategic. He gave me a single nod, the way you nod at someone in an elevator. "Robert," I said. Another nod. Linda tilted her head toward the box in my arm. "Oh, Frank, you really shouldn't have." The smile didn't waver. "You didn't need to bring anything." "I brought a pie," I said. "For Noah." How thoughtful. The two words landed with the precise weight of the opposite meaning. Noah tugged at my sleeve. "Can I show you my room, Grandpa? I got a new telescope." "Give Grandpa a minute to settle in, Noah." Daniel's voice came from behind me, quiet, even the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to land like an order. Noah's hand dropped from my sleeve. He took a small step back and looked at the floor, and something in my chest pulled tight and hot at the sight of it. 10 years old and already that practiced at making himself smaller. Patricia appeared at the top of the stairs. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back, and she was dressed carefully, the way people dress when they're trying to look like everything is fine. She came down the stairs and crossed the room and put her arms around me, and I held on maybe a second longer than she expected, because I felt her hesitate before she hugged me back. "Dad." Her voice was even. "It's good to see you. You too, sweetheart." I pulled back and looked at her face. There were things moving behind her eyes that she wasn't going to say in this room in front of these people. And I knew it. And she knew I knew it. "You look tired." "I'm fine." She said it the way people say it when they mean the opposite. "Let me show you where you can put your things." She led me down the hallway toward the guest room. I followed, carrying my box, listening to the sound of Linda saying something behind us in a low voice and Daniel responding in that same flat, even tone. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. The guest room was neat and impersonal, white bedspread, one generic landscape print on the wall, a single lamp on the nightstand. I set my box down on the luggage rack and turned around. Patricia was standing in the doorway. She had her arms crossed over her chest, not defensively, more like she was holding herself together. "Daniel's parents flew in from San Francisco yesterday," she said. "For Noah's party." I should have mentioned it. "It's fine," I said. "They're staying through Sunday." I looked at her. "Patricia." "It's fine." She nodded. She looked at the box on the luggage rack, then back at me. Something flickered across her face, guilt maybe, or something older than guilt. "We're starting the party at 2, she said. "Noah's been excited all week." "Good." I smiled and I meant it. That's what matters. She gave me a small smile back, the first real one I had seen since I walked in, and for just a moment she looked like the girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter watching her mother pull a pie out of the oven. Then she straightened up, uncrossed her arms, and the moment passed. "I'll let you get settled," she said. She pulled the door almost closed behind her. I sat down on the edge of the white bedspread and looked at the wall. From somewhere down the hall, I could hear Daniel's voice, low and measured, and then Linda's answer, and then the particular quality of silence that follows when two people have finished saying something they didn't want overheard. My hands were steady on my knees, but my jaw ached from holding it set, and I realized I had been clenching it since the moment Daniel's eyes had found mine across the entryway. I looked at the box on the luggage rack. The journal was in there, the receipts, the letter from the real estate company, whose name I still didn't recognize. I didn't know yet what this day was going to become, but I knew, sitting in that white room that smelled like nobody lived there, that the pie I had baked this morning was not going to be the most important thing I had brought with me. By 2 o'clock, the house was full of people I had never met. They arrived in expensive cars and nicer clothes than I owned, carrying wine bottles and gift bags with tissue paper spilling out the tops. Daniel greeted each of them at the door with a handshake and a laugh that came easy and loud, a completely different man than the one who had looked at me across the entryway that morning. I sat in a chair near the window with a glass of water and watched. Nobody introduced me to anyone. Nobody came over. I was 72 years old, sitting 12 feet from a conversation about quarterly returns and golf handicaps, and I might as well have been furniture. Noah found me 20 minutes in. Grandpa. He appeared at my elbow, slightly breathless. Come outside. I want to show you something. I followed him through the sliding glass door and out into the backyard, which was large and manicured and smelled like cut grass and California sunshine. Noah sat down on the back steps and patted the space beside him. I lowered myself down next to him, my knees registering their usual complaint. Better out here, Noah said. Much better. I agreed. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times. He held it out to me with both hands, the way kids offer things they're proud of. I unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing in crayon, two figures standing in front of a small house with a red door. One figure was tall with gray hair. The other was small with a gap-toothed smile. Above them, in the uneven capital letters of a child who was still making friends with handwriting, Noah had written "Our Family." My throat tightened so fast, I had to look up at the sky for a moment. I made it at school, Noah said. Mrs. Henderson said draw someone important. I drew you and me in front of your house. He paused. I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks. I kept forgetting to mail it. I'm glad you didn't, I said. I like getting it in person. He grinned. Then the grin faded slowly, the way clouds move across the sun. Grandpa, he said. How come you stopped calling? The question hit me somewhere below the sternum. What do you mean, buddy? My dad said you got busy. Noah picked at a loose thread on his shoelace, not looking at me. He said old people get tired, and sometimes they pull back from things. He said it wasn't our fault. I held the drawing in both hands and looked at this boy 10 years old, trying to make sense of something an adult had told him that didn't feel right. Because children always know when something doesn't feel right, even when they can't name it. Noah. I kept my voice steady even though my chest was doing something painful. I called your mom every single week. I left messages. I sent texts. I paused. I never stopped. Noah looked up at me. His forehead creased. But Dad said... I know what your dad said. I folded the drawing carefully along its original creases. I'm telling you what I did. Noah stared at me for a long moment, working something out behind his eyes. Then he reached over and tucked his hand into mine, small fingers, wrapping around my knuckles, and didn't say anything else. We sat like that while the party noise floated through the glass behind us. From inside, Daniel's voice cut through the glass, sharp and clear. Noah, time for cake. Noah stood up immediately. He hesitated, then handed me the folded drawing. You keep it, Grandpa. He went inside. I sat alone on the back steps, the drawing in both hands, staring out at the perfect California lawn, and felt something cold and certain settle in my chest. Something was wrong here. Something had been wrong for a long time. I followed Noah inside, and the party noise closed around me like water. Someone had dimmed the lights in the dining room. The long table was set with plates and candles, and in the center right where the birthday cake was supposed to go, there was an empty space waiting. Noah's friends clustered at one end, loud and electric, the way 10-year-olds are when sugar and excitement collide. The adults filled the other end wine glasses in hand conversations already resuming. I went to the kitchen and picked up the pie. I had wrapped it in foil and transferred it to Patricia's nicest cake stand that morning, while nobody was looking, a white ceramic stand I had found in the cabinet above the refrigerator. The pie sat on it perfectly. Dark golden crust, crimped edges, 3 small vents cut in the top the way Eleanor always did it. I carried it out. Noah saw it first. Grandma's apple pie. His voice cracked with excitement, high and bright, cutting straight through the adult conversation. "That's Grandma Eleanor's apple pie, Mom. Grandpa made it." A few of the guests smiled. One woman leaned over to look. The mood in the room lifted just slightly, the way it does when something genuine enters a space full of performance. Then Daniel stood up from his chair at the head of the table. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked toward me with that same measured pace he'd used coming down the stairs that morning, and something in the room shifted. I felt it before I understood it, a drop in temperature. A collective intake of breath, the way animals go quiet before weather changes. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the pie. Then he reached out and took the cake stand out of my hands. "Daniel." Patricia's voice came from across the table, uncertain, barely loud enough. Daniel didn't look at her. He turned and walked to the kitchen, and I heard it, the hollow metallic sound of the trash can lid lifting, and then a heavier sound, and then the lid falling back into place. The room went completely still. My hands were empty. I looked down at them, not quite understanding what had just happened. My brain refusing to process the sequence of events with any speed. The smell of cinnamon was still in the air. That was the thing that the smell was still there. Like the pie didn't know yet that it was gone. Daniel walked back into the dining room, straightening his cuffs. "My mother has a sensitivity to apples," he said loudly to the room, not to me. I should have been clearer about that beforehand. He looked at me then, and his voice dropped just enough to feel pointed. "What kind of man brings food to someone's home without checking for allergies first?" My hand found the edge of the dining table. I pressed my palm flat against it to keep myself steady because my legs had gone strange beneath me. Not weak exactly, but uncertain, like the floor had shifted an inch. I looked at Linda. She was seated exactly where she had been all afternoon, back straight, hands folded, expression composed. She wasn't coughing. She wasn't reaching for water. She wasn't doing anything a person does when they've just been inches away from something that could hurt them. She was simply sitting there watching the room with the patient satisfaction of someone watching a plan execute correctly. I looked at Patricia. Patricia was looking at the tablecloth, not at me, not at Daniel. At the white tablecloth in front of her plate, her jaw tight, her hands flat on either side of her silverware. One of the guests, a man in a blue blazer I didn't know, said quietly, "Daniel, maybe," and stopped when Daniel's eyes moved to him. Noah's face had crumpled, his chin was trembling, and his eyes had gone glassy, and he looked exactly the way he had looked at 4 years old when he fell off the swing set in our backyard in Queens, that terrible suspended moment before the crying starts. He looked at the kitchen, then at me, then at his mother, and when Patricia still didn't look up from the tablecloth, Noah made a sound low in his throat and bolted for the hallway. His footsteps hammered down the hall. A door closed. I stood at the head of that table with empty hands and the smell of cinnamon fading from the air, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not yet, but something underneath anger, something foundational and cold. The particular pain of a person who has been made to feel that their love is an inconvenience. I set the drawing carefully, Noah's drawing our family the red door, into my shirt pocket. Then I walked down the hall toward the sound of a closed door. Before I reveal what was waiting for me behind that closed door comment, the word apple, so I know you're still watching. Because my grandson had been carrying a secret for weeks. And the moment he showed me what was on that phone, I finally understood everything. Please note, some elements of this story are fictional, added to bring the message to life more fully. If you'd prefer a different kind of content, this is a good moment to choose that, no judgment at all. But if you're with me, keep watching. I knocked 3 times soft, the way I always had when Patricia was small and upset and needed a minute before she could let anyone in. Noah, it's Grandpa. A pause. Then the lock clicked, and the door opened 2 inches, one eye appearing in the gap, red-rimmed, wet, still deciding. "Can I come in?" I asked. The door opened the rest of the way. Noah's room was the only place in this house that felt lived in. There were sneakers kicked under this desk, a half-finished Lego set on the floor, a Lakers pennant tacked slightly crooked above the bed. And on the wall above his dresser, in a simple wooden frame, a photograph Eleanor and Noah at the kitchen table in Queens, both of them laughing at something outside the frame, her hand on his shoulder. My chest cracked open a little at the sight of it. Noah threw himself face down onto the bed and pressed his face into the pillow. His shoulders were shaking. I sat down on the edge of the mattress beside him and put my hand on his back and waited while he cried. Really cried, the ugly kind, the kind kids do when they're too young to know they're supposed to hide it. "It's okay," I said. "Go ahead." He cried for another minute. Then he turned his head sideways on the pillow, face blotchy and wet, and looked at me. "I saved your card." "Grandpa," he said, his voice thick. "When Dad took the pie, I grabbed your card out of the box before he could throw that away, too." My throat tightened so hard, I couldn't speak for a moment. This boy, this 10-year-old boy, had thought fast enough in the middle of that humiliation to reach into a box and save the one thing his grandfather had written by hand. "Thank you," I managed. "That means more than you know." Noah pushed himself up to sitting, wiped his face with the back of his hand. He reached under his pillow and pulled out the birthday card, creased now from being clutched, and set it on my knee like something precious. Then he reached under the pillow again and came out with an old phone, a basic model, the kind kids get before they're trusted with anything better. He held it out to me and his hand was trembling. "My Grandpa," he said, "I need to show you something, and I need you to not be mad at me." "I could never be mad at you." "Last week," he said carefully, the way children speak when they're recounting something they've rehearsed, "Dad left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to get something from the garage. I wasn't trying to look, but I walked by and the screen was on, and I saw your name." He paused. His chin wobbled once, then steadied. "I saw your name, Grandpa, and I took a picture of it. Because it felt wrong. I didn't understand all the words, but it felt wrong." I took the phone from his shaking hand. The screenshot was slightly blurry at one edge, taken fast by a child who knew he wasn't supposed to be doing it. But it was legible. A text thread between Daniel and a contact saved as Mom Linda. I read it slowly. "Daniel, the property on Parsons is assessed at 1.2. If we can get him to sign the transfer, we move by spring. Linda, he won't sign willingly. Patricia needs to bring it up, frame it as helping him in his old age. Daniel working on it. She's almost there. Linda. The old man is sentimental. Use the house angle. Tell her he can't maintain it alone. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because my brain kept trying to find another interpretation, a different meaning, some version of these words that didn't mean what they clearly meant. There wasn't one. My house on Parsons Boulevard. The house Eleanor and I had bought in 1987 for $80,000 and spent 30 years turning into a home. The house where Patricia had learned to walk, where Noah had taken his first steps on the kitchen linoleum, where Eleanor had died in the downstairs bedroom with the window open because she wanted to hear the garden. Assessed at one point, $2 million. And Daniel had been planning carefully, patiently, methodically to take it. I handed the phone back to Noah. My hands were steady. I didn't understand how they were steady, but they were. "You did the right thing," I said, showing me this. Noah's eyes filled up again. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I looked up at the photograph on the wall. Eleanor laughing, Noah laughing. The kitchen table in Queens with the window light coming in from the left, the way it always did in the afternoon. "I'm going to be," I said. Noah leaned his head against my arm. I put my arm around his thin shoulders and held on and looked at the photograph and felt something settle in me, not peace exactly, but something like the moment before you pick up a heavy thing. The gathering of what you have. Outside the door, the party had gone quiet. The party was over. I could tell by the sound or the absence of it. The voices and the clinking glasses and the forced laughter had dissolved, replaced by the occasional murmur of a departing guest, the soft thud of the front door closing, the crunch of tires on the driveway. I sat with Noah until his breathing had steadied and his eyes had dried. And then I told him to wash his face and drink some water, because those are the two things you tell a child when you want them to feel like the world still has order in it. I found Patricia in the kitchen. She was standing at the sink with her back to me, rinsing plates with the focused intensity of someone who was using the task to avoid thinking about something else. The kitchen light was on above the stove, casting everything in a warm yellow that felt like a lie given the circumstances. Patricia. She didn't startle. She had known I was coming. "Dad." She kept rinsing. "I'm sorry about what happened. Daniel gets protective when it comes to his mother and he..." "Patricia." I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. "Stop rinsing the plate, it's clean." She stopped. She set the plate in the drying rack and turned around, leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were dry, but the skin beneath them was tight in the way that means someone has been working hard to keep them that way. "I should have said something," she said. "At the table, I know that. Why didn't you..." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at a point somewhere past my shoulder. "It's complicated, Dad." "I know it is." I kept my voice even. "I'm not here to make it harder. I just want to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer." She looked at me then, directly, the lawyer in her surfacing the way it did when she sensed a question with weight behind it. "Did you ever get my calls?" I said. "Any of them. In the last 8 months. Something moved across her face, quick like a hand passing over a candle flame. "Dad, you know how busy things get. The caseload this quarter has been..." "Patricia." I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I called every week, sometimes twice. I left voicemails. I sent texts about nothing, about the weather, about the neighbor's dog, about a show I watched on Tuesday night. 8 months of nothing back." I paused. Does that sound like a man who stopped caring? Or does it sound like a man whose messages weren't getting through? The color shifted in her face. She uncrossed her arms. Slowly. Like a person who has just realized they've been holding a position they're no longer sure they believe in. Daniel said you called a few times early on, she said carefully, and then stopped. He said you mentioned to him that you needed more space, that the visits were becoming too much. I said nothing. I let that sit between us for a moment and do what it needed to do. Did I ever say that to you? I asked. In your memory, in 20 years of being your father, did I ever once say that being near you and Noah was too much for me? Patricia's jaw tightened. Her eyes went somewhere internal, scanning back through something the way people do when a fact they accepted without examining is suddenly being held up to light. He told me you called him directly, she said. Her voice had changed, slower now, more careful. That you said you were finding the relationship stressful, that you wanted some distance while you processed losing Mom. Something cold moved through my chest at that. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise, the confirmation of a thing you suspected, but hoped you were wrong about. Patricia, I said quietly. I have never spoken to Daniel on the phone. Not once. Not in the last 8 months, and not before that. I kept my eyes on hers. Check your call logs, check your messages, and then I want you to ask yourself one question. What question? Is what you believe about me based on what you know about me, or is it based on what someone else told you about me? The kitchen went very still. Patricia's hand moved to her pocket. Automatic, the way it does when a thought arrives that needs checking immediately. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved across the screen, opening something, scrolling, and I watched her face as she read. Her breathing changed. It got shallow and fast, like someone who has just stepped off a curb they didn't see coming. She kept scrolling, her eyes moving rapidly, and the color left her face in stages, cheeks first, then around the mouth, then all of it, until she looked like someone standing in a room where the temperature had just dropped 20 degrees. "Dad," she said. Her voice came out thin. "I need to just give me a minute." She walked out of the kitchen toward the hallway bathroom, and I heard the door close, and then the sound of the faucet running. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface, looking at the space where she had been standing. From down the hall came the low sound of Daniel's voice in the living room, unhurried, talking to someone on his phone. I looked at my hands. Then I looked at the door to the hallway. And I waited. The faucet in the hallway bathroom ran for a long time. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to it, the steady sound of water hitting porcelain. Going on longer than washing your hands requires the kind of running water that means someone is standing over a sink, holding themselves together by a thread. Then it stopped. 30 seconds of nothing. Then the bathroom door opened, and Patricia walked back into the kitchen. And the moment I saw her face, I understood that something had broken open in that small room that was not going to close again. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her mascara tracked in 2 thin lines down her cheeks, and she was holding her phone in both hands so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She walked to the kitchen table, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down with the careful movements of someone who does not trust their legs. She placed the phone on the table between us, screen up. "He blocked your number," she said. Her voice was stripped of everything, no inflection, no defense, nothing but the bare fact sitting there between us. 8 months ago, when I went to Sacramento for the Morrison deposition, I was gone for 2 days, and I left my phone at home because the hotel had a landline and I didn't want the distraction. She stopped, swallowed. "He had 2 days with my phone, and he blocked your number and moved everything you ever sent me into a hidden folder." I looked at the phone. The screen showed a long cascade of messages, green bubbles, my number dates going back 8 months. I could see fragments from where I sat. "Hope you're doing well." Saw something on TV that reminded me of your mother. Tell Noah his grandfather said hello. Patricia, there are 214 messages, Dad. Her voice cracked on the number. I counted them in the bathroom. 214. She pressed her hand flat over her mouth for a moment, and her shoulders heaved once hard before she pulled them back under control. I thought you had given up on us. Daniel said he kept saying that older people sometimes withdraw, that it wasn't personal, that you were grieving and needed distance. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, but came out broken. I believed him. I believed him because it was easier than believing the alternative. What was the alternative? I asked quietly. She looked at me across the table. Her eyes were devastated in a way I hadn't seen since the day we stood at Eleanor's grave, and she couldn't stop shaking. That my husband had been lying to me, she said, for a long time. About more than just this. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street. Patricia picked up the phone again and opened something a different screen, the blocked contacts list. She turned it toward me. There it was, Frank Calloway. Blocked 8 months, 3 days ago. He did it while I was gone, she said. Deliberately. While I was in Sacramento working the 14-hour deposition and trusting him with my home and my son. She set the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the table. Her fingers were trembling. I have been walking around for 8 months thinking my father stopped loving us, and the whole time you were... Her voice dissolved. She pressed her lips together, hard jaw working, fighting it. 214 messages, Dad. About the weather, about the neighbor's dog, about some show you watched on a Tuesday night. I didn't know what else to send, I said. My own voice had gone rough. I just wanted you to know I was still there. That did it. Patricia bent forward over the table and cried, not the restrained kind. Not the kind people do when they're aware of being watched, but the deep, wrenching kind that comes from a place that has been sealed off too long. Her shoulders shook, and her breath came in ragged pulls, and she pressed one hand over her eyes like she could hold it in and couldn't. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She grabbed onto it with both of hers and held on. We stayed like that while she cried herself through it. The grief and the shame and the rage all tangled together, coming out in waves. I kept my hand steady under hers and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that was more useful than just being there, being the thing she was holding on to. When it finally quieted, she lifted her head. Her face was a wreck, and she looked more like herself than she had all day. I owe you 8 months of phone calls, she said. You don't owe me anything. I owe you an apology. Patricia, Dad. Her grip on my hand tightened. Let me say it. I am sorry. I should have tried harder. I should have driven to Queens. I should have written a letter. I should have... She stopped, took a breath. I kept waiting for you to try harder. And you were trying. You were trying every single week, and I never knew. I squeezed her hand once. You know now. She nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Then she picked up her phone, and something shifted in her expression. The grief folding back, something harder and cleaner taking its place. She stood up from the chair. I need to talk to Daniel, she said. Her voice had changed. It was the voice she used in courtrooms, I realized. Measured, certain. The voice of a woman who has finished being uncertain. She walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, and I heard her footsteps stop outside the living room where Daniel was still on his phone, and I heard her say, clear and level and without any tremor at all, Daniel, we need to talk. Right now, before I tell you what came out of Daniel's mouth when he finally had nowhere left to hide, drop a 9 in the comments so I know you're still with me. Because in the next few minutes, 3 different people in that living room said things that cannot be taken back. And one of them was 10 years old. Quick note: portions of this story include fictional elements included purely for educational and emotional impact. If you'd rather not continue, this is the perfect moment to find something else, and I mean that kindly. But if you're staying, you won't regret it. I followed her to the doorway of the living room and stopped there. Daniel was standing near the window, his phone still in his hand, looking at Patricia with the practiced calm of a man who has navigated difficult conversations before and won most of them. Linda was on the sofa. Robert had moved to the armchair by the fireplace. The room felt arranged somehow, like everyone had taken their positions. "What's going on?" Daniel said. His voice was even, curious almost. Patricia held up her phone. "I want you to explain this." Daniel looked at the screen. Something passed across his face, fast controlled, gone almost before it appeared. "I don't know what I'm looking at." "You're looking at my blocked contacts list," Patricia said, "with my father's number in it. Blocked 8 months ago." She took one step toward him. "While I was in Sacramento." "Patricia, did you do this?" Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. He set his own phone down on the side table with a careful, deliberate movement. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "Your father was calling constantly. You were stressed, you were in the middle of the Morrison case, and every time he called, you got upset for the rest of the day. I made a judgment call. You made a judgment call." Patricia's voice was very quiet. The quieter she got, I had learned over 44 years, the more dangerous it was. "You decided without telling me to cut off communication between me and my father. For 8 months. I was going to tell you when the time was right." "When was that going to be, Daniel?" Linda shifted on the sofa. "Patricia, sweetheart, you have to understand that Daniel was only—" "Linda." Patricia turned to look at her mother-in-law. "I'm speaking to my husband." Linda's mouth closed. She looked at Daniel. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. Daniel tried a different angle. His voice softened, took on the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Look, I know this seems like a big deal, but your father and I have spoken. He understood that some distance was healthy. He agreed. He has never spoken to you on the phone," Patricia said flatly. "Not once. He told me. And I believe him." Daniel's jaw tightened. Just slightly. The first crack. "Patricia, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly right now. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years." She took another step toward him. "What about the allergy, Daniel, your mother's apple allergy that you've never once mentioned in 9 years of marriage? The one that justified throwing my father's pie in the trash in front of our son and 20 of our friends." Daniel said nothing. From the staircase came a small voice. "She doesn't have an allergy." Everyone turned. Noah was sitting on the 3rd step from the bottom, knees pulled to his chest, still in his Lakers jersey. His voice was small, but it didn't waver. "Grandma Linda doesn't have an apple allergy," he said again. "We went to Nobu last Tuesday for Grandma's birthday dinner. She had the apple strudel. I watched her eat the whole thing. She said it was the best thing on the menu." The room went the kind of still that has weight to it. Linda's composure didn't shatter women. Like Linda Reed, don't shatter. But something behind her eyes recalibrated fast and cold, like a camera lens refocusing. Robert looked at the floor. Daniel looked at his son. Noah looked back at his father without blinking, And in that moment, that 10-year-old boy had more dignity than anyone else in the room. "Noah," Daniel said quietly. "Go upstairs." "No." Noah's chin came up. His voice shook slightly, but his eyes didn't. "Grandpa brought that pie for my birthday. He made it himself. He's been making it since 5 o'clock this morning in Queens, and you threw it in the trash and lied about why." He looked at his father the way children look at adults when they have decided to stop pretending they don't see what they see. "That wasn't okay, Dad." Patricia made a sound, half breath, half sob, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Daniel turned back to her. The reasonable voice was gone now. His jaw was set hard, and there was something moving behind his eyes that he was working to keep contained. "You want the truth?" he said. "Fine. I did block his number. Because every time your father called you, spent 3 days being sad and distracted and unavailable, and I was tired of it. I was tired of competing with a dead woman's memory and an old man's guilt trips for my own wife's attention." The words hit the room like something thrown. Patricia lowered her hand from her mouth slowly. Her eyes were dry now. All the tears burned away, replaced by something harder. "Say that again," she said softly. "I'm not going to—" "You called my mother a dead woman's memory." Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper, which meant it was the most serious she had been all night. "In my house. In front of my son. In front of my father." She turned to look at me in the doorway, and her eyes were shining with something that wasn't grief anymore. Then she turned back to Daniel. "I think," she said, "it's time for you to hear what my father has to say." She looked at me and nodded once. I stepped into the room. The box was where I had left it, against the wall by the entryway next to my carry-on, exactly where I had set it when I walked in that morning. I crossed the living room and picked it up. Nobody spoke. Daniel watched me with his arms crossed, and his jaw set the expression of a man who had not yet decided whether to be contemptuous or cautious. Linda sat perfectly upright on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, her face arranged into something neutral that cost her visible effort. Robert stared at a fixed point on the carpet. Patricia stood near the fireplace with her arms at her sides, and Noah had come down from the stairs and was sitting on the bottom step close enough to see far enough to feel safe. I carried the box to the coffee table and set it down. I sat in the armchair across from the sofa, the one Robert had vacated, and I opened the box. I did not rush. The first thing I took out was a folded sheet of paper, soft at the creases from being handled many times. I unfolded it and set it on the coffee table, face up. "Bank statement," I said. "June of 2019. Patricia, you'll recognize this. You had just lost the Harrington account, and the firm had put you on reduced hours. You called me on a Thursday night, and you were crying so hard I could barely understand you. You said you were 3 months behind on the second mortgage and you didn't know what to do." Patricia's breath caught audibly. "I drove to the bank the next morning," I said. "Cleared out most of what your mother and I had put aside." I tapped the paper. $43,000, wired directly to your mortgage servicer. You never asked where it came from, and I never told you." Daniel's arms uncrossed. Slowly. The second thing I took out was a manila envelope thick with papers. I set it beside the bank statement. 3 years of tuition receipts, I said. Westwood Academy. Noah's school. I looked up at Daniel. $41,000 a year. I've been covering it since Noah started 2nd grade. I told Patricia it was a gift from Eleanor's life insurance. There was no gift. I paid it out of my retirement account and took the tax penalty. The room was very still now. Even Daniel had stopped moving. Noah's head came up slowly from where he sat on the stairs. His eyes were wide and fixed on me, processing something too large for 10 years old. The third thing I took out was a photograph printed on regular paper, slightly faded. The front porch of Patricia's house in Beverly Hills 2 summers ago, freshly painted and re-roofed. I set it next to the receipts. The contractors were from Flushing, I said. I found them through a guy I used to work with. They drove out in July and spent 2 weeks. I stayed in the guest room, the same room I slept in last night, and I cooked for them every day, and I painted the trim myself because I wanted to do something with my hands. I paused. Patricia said the house looked beautiful. Daniel, you said, and I'm quoting, that it was about time the place got some attention. Daniel's face had gone the color of old concrete. The fourth thing I took out was a single white envelope with a return address I didn't recognize, a real estate company on Queens Boulevard. I set it in the center of the table and looked at Daniel directly. This came to my house 3 weeks ago, I said. Addressed to me. A company I have never contacted, asking if I was ready to discuss listing my property on Parsons Boulevard. I left the envelope where it was. I didn't understand why I received it. I think I do now. Daniel opened his mouth. I'm not finished, I said. He closed it. The last thing I took from the box was the journal. Dark brown leather, soft and worn at the corners. Eleanor's initials pressed into the lower right of the cover, EMC, Eleanor Margaret Calloway. I held it for a moment with both hands before I set it on my knee. Linda made a small sound. Not sympathy, something else. Recognition, maybe. The sound of someone who has just seen the board change. My wife kept this journal for the last 4 years of her life, I said. Patricia, she asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I looked at my daughter across the room. Her hand was pressed flat against her sternum, right over her heart, like she was trying to hold something in place. She wrote about a lot of things in here. About our marriage, about the house, about what she hoped for you. I opened it to the last entry. My voice thickened as I found the line. I stopped, pressed my lips together, breathed once. Then I read it. She writes, My Patricia, I don't know when you'll read this. I don't know what things will look like by then. But I know your father will still be there, because that man has never once in 40 years stopped showing up. Don't let anyone convince you that his love is a burden. It is the least burdensome thing I have ever known. Find your way back to him. Whatever it takes. Find your way back. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word. Daniel took a step toward the coffee table. I raised one hand, open palm, no aggression. Just stop. And Daniel stopped. I closed the journal. I placed it on the coffee table directly in front of Patricia. Then I looked at the room and said quietly, I think it's time I said a few things. I had never been a man of many words. 30 years in construction teaches you that what you build matters more than what you say about it. Eleanor used to tease me about it, said I could go 3 days without a non-essential sentence and be perfectly content. She wasn't wrong. I had always believed that if you did the right things consistently enough, the people who mattered would eventually understand you without you having to explain yourself. I had been wrong about that. So I sat in that living room in Beverly Hills with the journal on the coffee table and the box open beside me, and the people who had rearranged my life sitting across from me, and I said what I should have said a long time ago. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty, I began. I want to say that first, because what I'm about to say is going to feel that way, and I need you to understand that's not the intention. I looked at Patricia. When your mother got sick, I said, I made her a promise. I told her I would not become one of those fathers who drifts, who shows up at Christmas and disappears in between, who lets distance turn into absence and absence turn into estrangement. I stopped, cleared my throat. I have driven to Los Angeles 4 times in the past 3 years. I have flown twice. I have sent 214 messages that I now know were never received. I have paid for things I never told you about because I didn't want you to feel indebted. I did all of this not because I wanted credit for it. I leaned forward. I did it because you are my daughter and Noah is my grandson, and this is what fathers do. This is what grandfathers do. It is the only thing I know how to do well. Patricia pressed her fingers hard against her mouth. Her eyes were filling again, but she held herself very still, like she was afraid that if she moved, the tears would spill and she wouldn't be able to stop them. I looked at Linda and Robert. "I'm not speaking to you," I said, not unkindly, simply as a fact. "What I have to say is not for you." Linda's chin came up. Robert looked at his hands. From the staircase came the small sound of Noah shifting on the step. I looked up at him, this boy in his oversized Lakers jersey, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands, watching me with an expression I had never seen on a child's face before. It was the expression of someone paying very close attention because they understand on some level they cannot yet articulate that what they are hearing matters. "Noah," I said. He straightened up immediately. "I want you to remember something," I said. "Not because of tonight, not because of anything that happened in this room, but because you are 10 years old and the things you learn now about what a man is supposed to be will stay with you longer than you think." I paused. My chest was doing something complicated. A man's value is not in what he carries in his hands when he walks into a room. It is in what he has done quietly when nobody was watching for the people he loves. Remember that. Whatever else you forget, remember that. Noah nodded. Once solemn the way children nod when they are not just agreeing but filing something away. I turned back to Daniel. I had been preparing for this moment, without knowing I was preparing for it, in the cab from the airport in the guest room that smelled like nobody lived there on the back steps, while the party noise floated through the glass. I had been building toward this without a blueprint, the way I used to build walls one thing at a time, each piece set level before the next one goes on top. "Daniel," I said, "I have never disliked you. I want to be clear about that. I have disagreed with you. I have been hurt by you. But I have never sat in a room and wished you harm." I kept my voice even because the even voice was the one with the most weight. "What you did to my relationship with my daughter was deliberate and sustained, and it caused real damage to real people. To Patricia, to Noah, and yes, to me." I stopped, pressed my hands flat on my knees, and breathed once slow. But I am 72 years old, and I have been through enough to know that I am not going to sit here and catalog your failures as a husband and a son-in-law. That is not my job tonight. Daniel's jaw was working. He wanted to say something and was holding it back. "My job tonight is to say one thing to my daughter." I turned back to Patricia. She was crying now, not the wrenching kind from the kitchen, but the quiet, continuous kind tears, moving down her face without drama, her breath steady, her eyes fixed on mine. "I never needed you to pay me back," I said. "Not $1 of it, not one phone call out of the 214. Not one acknowledgement, not one thank you, not one conversation about any of it." My voice thickened on the next words, and I let it. "I only needed one thing from you. I only ever needed one thing." "Dad?" Her voice broke on the single syllable. "I needed you not to be ashamed of me," I said. "That's all. I needed to not be the father you apologized for. The old man from Queens who didn't fit. I needed to know that when you thought about where you came from, it wasn't something you were trying to get away from. I stopped, swallowed hard. I don't know if I was that father for you, but I need you to know that I tried every single day to be. The room was completely still. Noah had his face buried in his hands on the staircase, and his thin shoulders were shaking. Patricia stood up from where she had been leaning against the wall, walked across the living room, and put her arms around me, not the brief, careful hug from this morning, but a real one, the kind that means something. Both arms locked around my shoulders, her face pressed against the side of my head. "You were," she said into my hair, her voice ragged and certain at the same time. "Dad, you were. I'm so sorry. You were exactly that father." I put my arms around my daughter and held on, and my eyes burned, and I did not try to stop them. Daniel said, his voice flat and hard, "Are you done?" I lifted my head, looked at him over Patricia's shoulder. "No," I said. "Not yet." Patricia stepped back from me, slowly wiping her face with the back of her wrist. Daniel was still standing near the window. His posture had changed. The relaxed authority he had carried all day was gone, replaced by something coiled and defensive, like a man who has just realized the ground under him is less solid than he thought. He looked at his wife, then at me, then at the box on the coffee table, and something moved behind his eyes that I recognized as calculation. He had not gotten to where he was in life by losing gracefully. "You want to talk about what's right," Daniel said. His voice had dropped into a register I hadn't heard from him yet. Lower, harder, stripped of the reasonable veneer he had been maintaining all evening. "Let's talk about what's right. You showed up at my home uninvited. You upset my wife. You disturbed my son on his birthday. You've been sitting in my living room for the past 20 minutes, making accusations you can't substantiate." He pulled his phone from his pocket. "I'm going to call my attorney." "Daniel," Patricia started. "No." He held up one hand without looking at her. "No, I've listened to enough. Frank, you want to come into my house and put documents on my table and read from a journal like you're presenting evidence, fine. We can do this properly. Marcus handles exactly this kind of situation." He dialed. The room waited while the phone rang. I watched Daniel's face as he listened to it connect. Watched the small adjustment of satisfaction when someone picked up. He turned slightly away from the room, lowering his voice, and I caught fragments: uninvited guest, emotional disturbance, potential restraining order, harassment claim. Robert Reed straightened in his armchair. He looked at me the way men look at you when they want you to understand that money and influence are about to enter the conversation. "Frank," Robert said, and it was the most he had said all evening, "you're a smart man. You know how these things go. Marcus Heller has been the Reed family attorney for 20 years. Whatever you think you have in that box, Robert." I said it the same way I had said it to Linda. Not unkindly, just clearly. "I'm not speaking to you either." Robert's mouth closed. Daniel finished his call and turned back to the room with the expression of a man who has just remembered he has reinforcements. "Marcus is available. He says that given the circumstances, a restraining order is absolutely something we can pursue. Uninvited entry, emotional distress, disruption of a minor's birthday event." I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed Jim. He picked up on the second ring the way Jim always picked up immediately. No preamble, the habit of 30 years answering calls at all hours. "Frank, everything okay?" "I need 2 minutes," I said. "I'm in Los Angeles. I need to know what the current statute is on elder financial abuse under New York law, specifically as it relates to unauthorized attempts to transfer or obtain control of an elderly person's real property." A brief pause. I could hear Jim shifting the sound of a chair, the click of what was probably his laptop. "You talking about the house?" Jim said. "I am." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Okay," Jim said. "New York Social Services Law Section 473. Elder financial abuse involving real property, and we're talking about unauthorized transfer schemes, fraudulent POA attempts, third-party solicitation without the owner's consent. That's felony territory, Frank. The value of your property puts it well above the misdemeanor threshold. You're looking at a Class C felony if someone attempted to arrange a sale or transfer without your knowledge or consent. That carries 2 to 15 years. He paused. "You have documentation." "I have a letter," I said. "From a real estate company I never contacted. Sent to my home address 3 weeks ago, asking about listing the property." "Save it," Jim said immediately. "Don't touch it more than you already have. And Frank, if someone was coordinating that contact without your knowledge, that's not a civil matter. That's criminal." He let that sit for a moment. "You need me to come out there?" "Not yet," I said. "Thank you, Jim." "Call me back," he said. "Anytime." I ended the call. The room had gone very quiet during that conversation, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, that you can feel against your skin. Daniel's phone was at his side. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not contempt. Something closer to uncertainty. I set my phone on the arm of the chair and looked at him. "Daniel," I said, "your attorney can absolutely pursue a restraining order. That is your right, and I won't argue it." I reached into the box and picked up the letter from the real estate company, the white envelope with the Queens Boulevard return address. I held it up so the room could see it. "But before Marcus files anything, I would suggest you ask him what happens in the state of New York when there is documented evidence that a third party coordinated the solicitation of an elderly person's property without that person's knowledge or consent." I set the letter back on the coffee table. That letter was sent to my home, addressed to me, from a company I have never contacted and never heard of. Under New York law, the coordination of that contact, if it can be shown to have originated with someone who stood to benefit financially, is not a civil matter. I paused. Let that land. "It is a felony, Daniel. A Class C felony. 2 to 15 years. The color left Daniel's face the way water leaves a glass completely and all at once. Linda made a sound on the sofa. Not words. Just a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, the sound a person makes when they step on something unexpected in the dark. And then Robert Reed, who had been sitting in that armchair with the composed stillness of a man accustomed to rooms going his way, stood up. He didn't say anything. He simply stood up slowly, with the deliberate movements of a man who has just made a private decision, and walked to the window and looked out at the dark Beverly Hills street with his back to the room. It was the loudest thing anyone had done all evening. Patricia was watching her husband. I watched her watch him, the way her eyes moved across his face, reading something there, some confirmation of something she had been trying not to confirm for a long time. Her jaw was set. Her hands were at her sides. She looked like a woman who had just finished grieving something and was ready to do what comes next. Daniel looked at me, then at the letter on the table, then at his father's back at the window. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I want everyone to calm down," he said finally. His voice had lost its floor. It came out uneven, the words slightly too fast, and I could hear in it the first real tremor of a man who has run out of angles. "This is a family matter. This doesn't need to involve—" "You made it involve attorneys," Patricia said. "Not us." She looked at me. I nodded once, and then she turned to Linda and her voice was the quietest and most absolute it had been all night. I need you and Robert to leave my house, she said. Right now, please. Linda Reed did not leave quietly. Women like Linda Reed never do. She rose from the sofa with the slow, practiced dignity of someone who has spent a lifetime making exits feel like choices rather than defeats. She smoothed her slacks with both hands. She picked up her purse from the side table. She looked around the living room with an expression of mild, collected disappointment, the way a person looks at a restaurant that has failed to meet expectations. And then she turned to Patricia. I want you to think very carefully, Linda said. Her voice was warm and measured and absolutely lethal underneath. About what you are doing right now. About what you are choosing. Because once certain things are said in a family, they cannot be unsaid. And once certain doors are closed. Linda. Patricia did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The door is right there. Linda's eyes moved to me. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let me see that whatever composure she was displaying on the surface underneath it, something was burning that had not been there an hour ago. Then she looked back at her daughter-in-law and gave a single nod, the nod of a woman filing something away for later. Come on, Robert, she said. Robert was already at the door. He had moved there quietly without announcement, the way he did everything efficiently, without drawing attention to the fact that he was doing it. He opened the front door and held it without looking at anyone. Daniel had not moved from his position near the window. Patricia looked at her husband. Daniel. He turned his head. His face was doing something complicated, the anger and the calculation, and something that might have been, underneath all of it, the beginning of fear. Not fear of me, fear of consequence. The particular fear of a man who has been very certain for a very long time and has just felt that certainty develop its first crack. Daniel, Patricia said again, go with your parents tonight, please. You're serious. His voice was flat, disbelieving. I am. Patricia, if I walk out that door tonight... I know, she said. Go anyway. Something moved across Daniel's face that I could not entirely read. He looked at Noah on the stairs. Noah, who had not moved, who was sitting there with his arms wrapped around his knees, watching his father with an expression of careful, exhausted neutrality. Daniel looked at his son for a long moment, and whatever he saw there did not give him what he was looking for. He crossed the living room. He picked up his phone from the side table. He stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at Noah. I love you, buddy, he said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Noah looked at his father. I know, Dad, he said quietly. I love you too. It was the saddest thing said in that room all evening, and it was said by a 10-year-old boy. Daniel walked to the front door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back one last time, and he looked at Patricia with something that was not anger anymore and not calculation anymore. It was rawer than that. It was the look of the man who has just watched something he built fall down and cannot yet decide whether to be sorry about it. He didn't say anything. He walked out. The door closed behind him with a sound that was not a slam, but was close enough sharp and definitive, the sound of something ending. Linda's voice floated back through the door, clearly intended to carry, when you've had time to think, Patricia, you know where we are. Then the sound of footsteps on the front walk, car doors, an engine, then nothing. Patricia stood in the middle of her living room and listened to the nothing with her back very straight and her hands open at her sides. And I watched her breathe 1 breath, 2, 3. The way a person breathes when they are reminding themselves that they are still standing. Then Noah came down the stairs. He crossed the room without a word and walked straight to his mother and put his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her shoulder. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word and wrapped both arms around him and held on her chin, coming down to rest on top of his head, her eyes closing. I stayed where I was. This moment was not mine. This moment was theirs, mother and son in the wreckage, and the relief of it holding each other up in the living room of a house that already felt different than it had an hour ago. The air in it had changed. Something that had been pressing down on everything in this house had lifted, and what was left in its place was not comfortable exactly, but it was real, and real was something I could work with. After a while, Patricia opened her eyes and looked at me over the top of Noah's head. "Dad," she said. Her voice was hollowed out and soft. "I don't know what to do next." "That's all right," I said. "You don't have to know tonight." Noah pulled back from his mother and looked at me with red eyes and a question forming on his face that he hadn't found the words for yet. I crossed the room and put one hand on his shoulder and one hand on Patricia's, and the three of us stood there in the middle of the living room while the house settled around us into its new quiet. "How about," I said, "we make some tea?" The kitchen at 11 o'clock at night felt like a different room than the one Patricia had been standing in 2 hours ago. The overhead light was too bright, so I found the switch for the small light above the stove and used that instead. It cast everything in a softer amber, the countertops, the table, the 3 mugs I set out from the cabinet above the coffee maker. Patricia found the tea bags in the second drawer she tried, which told me she knew where things were in her own kitchen, even if tonight she was moving through it, like someone navigating by memory in the dark. Noah sat at the table with his chin in his hands and watched me fill the kettle. "Grandpa?" he said. "Yeah, buddy. Is everything going to be okay?" I set the kettle on the burner and turned around to look at him. His face was tired in the bone-deep way that children get when they have been holding too much for too long. Eyes heavy, the gap-toothed grin nowhere in evidence, the Lakers jersey wrinkled from hours of sitting on stairs and floors and beds. "But not all at once," I said honestly. "But yes, it's going to be okay." He considered this. Nodded slowly, the way he had nodded on the stairs when I talked to him about what a man is supposed to be, filing it away, putting it somewhere safe. Patricia sat down across from Noah. She had taken her hair down at some point, and it fell loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger for it, and more tired, and more like herself than she had looked all day. The kettle began to hiss. I made the tea the way Eleanor had always made it, bags in first water, just off the boil, 3 minutes without rushing. I carried the mugs to the table and sat down, and the 3 of us wrapped our hands around the warmth and didn't say anything for a little while, and that was all right. It was the comfortable kind of not saying anything, the kind that happens between people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space. Noah lasted about 12 minutes before his eyes closed. It happened the way it always happens with children, gradually, and then all at once. His chin dropped toward his chest. He jerked awake, once blinked at the kitchen with momentary confusion, and then his head tipped sideways until it found Patricia's shoulder, and he went out completely. She put her arm around him and didn't move, and above his sleeping head, her eyes found mine across the table. "He's been doing that since he was 2, she said softly. "Just dropping wherever he is when he's done." "You did the same thing," I said. "Used to fall asleep at the dinner table. Your mother would carry you up to bed, and you'd never even stir." Something moved across Patricia's face, tender and aching at the same time, the expression of someone touching a bruise they had forgotten they had. She looked down at Noah's sleeping head on her shoulder. "I've made so many mistakes, Dad," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically. just as a fact she was setting down on the table between us. You have, I said. She looked up, slightly surprised that I hadn't argued. So have I said. I could have pushed harder. I could have driven out here and knocked on the door instead of calling. I could have told you directly what I was paying for, instead of letting Daniel control the narrative by keeping you in the dark about your own finances. I wrapped both hands around my mug. I thought I was being respectful of your life. Maybe I was just being afraid. Patricia's eyes filled again, but she blinked it back. When did you know something was wrong? Honestly, I thought about it. The second month, when you didn't call back after I left the message about the roof. You had asked me to let you know when I got it fixed. I paused. You would never have not called back about the roof. She pressed her lips together hard. He deleted that message too. I don't know what he deleted, I said. I only know you didn't call. She nodded. She shifted slightly under Noah's weight, and he made a small sound in his sleep but didn't wake. He wasn't always like this, she said after a while. I want you to know that. When I met him, he was different. Attentive. He made me feel like I was the most important thing in his world. She paused. I think that was the problem, actually. I confused being the center of someone's attention with being loved. They're not the same thing. No, I said. They're not. Mom would have seen it, Patricia said. Her voice broke on the word mom just slightly, just enough. She would have seen it in the first year, and she would have found a way to tell me that I would have actually listened to. She stopped, swallowed. I miss her so much, Dad. I miss her, and I've been so busy being angry at everything that reminded me of her that I pushed you away because being around you made me feel how much she was gone, and I didn't want to feel that. The thing she had just said landed in me like a key finding a lock. All those unreturned calls, all those months of silence that I had interpreted as indifference or manipulation or Daniel's influence. And underneath all of it, underneath everything Daniel had done, and everything Linda had engineered this, my daughter missing her mother so badly that she had run from the person who reminded her most of what she had lost. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against them and held it there for a moment. She missed you too, I said when I could speak again. Every single day of those last 2 years. She talked about you constantly, about Noah, about things she wanted to tell you. I lowered my hand. That's why I brought the journal. Patricia looked at the doorway in the direction of the living room where the journal was still sitting on the coffee table. I'm afraid to read it, she said. I know. What if it, she stopped, started again. What if she was disappointed in me? Patricia. I waited until she looked at me. Your mother was not capable of being disappointed in you. Worried, yes. Sad sometimes, yes. But disappointed. I shook my head. Not once. Not ever. She held my gaze for a long moment with her eyes full and her jaw tight and her son sleeping on her shoulder. Then she reached past Noah and picked up her tea mug with her free hand and turned it slowly between her palms. I need to make this right, she said quietly. I don't know where to start, but I need to make this right. I know you do, I said. She looked at the box on the floor in the corner of the kitchen I had carried it in when we came to make tea, not wanting to leave Eleanor's journal on the coffee table in the living room. Patricia looked at the box for a moment, then set down her mug and leaned forward carefully, trying not to disturb Noah. She stopped. There was a white envelope visible at the side of the box, partially tucked beneath the stack of receipts. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. Dad, she said slowly. Whose handwriting is that on the envelope? I had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. Your mother's, I said. Patricia's hand moved toward the envelope the way hands move toward things they are not sure they should touch. Slow, careful, trembling slightly at the fingertips. She wrote it the week before she died, I said. She asked me to give it to you when the time was right. Patricia looked up at me, her eyes enormous, her breath suddenly shallow. Is now the right time? She whispered. I looked at her, my daughter, 44 years old, with her son asleep on her shoulder, and her marriage in pieces, and her mother's handwriting on an envelope 3 feet away from her hands. Yes, I said. I think now is exactly the right time. Patricia reached into the box carefully the way you reach for something fragile and lifted the envelope out. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long moment. The kitchen light above the stove was amber and low, and in it the envelope looked cream-colored, almost warm, the kind of paper Eleanor had always preferred for important things. Patricia's name was written across the front in her mother's handwriting, that particular slant, those particular loops, the capital P with the little flourish at the bottom, that Eleanor had never been able to train herself out of. Patricia's chin trembled once. She pressed her lips together and steadied it. Noah shifted in his sleep against her shoulder. She adjusted her arm around him automatically, not taking her eyes off the envelope. Do you want me to leave? I asked. She shook her head immediately. No. Stay. She turned the envelope over and worked the flap open with one finger slowly, like she was trying not to tear anything. Inside were 2 sheets of paper folded in thirds, covered on both sides in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Patricia unfolded them with both hands. Noah's head still on her shoulder, her tea cooling on the table, the house completely quiet around us. I looked out the window above the sink. The Beverly Hills street outside was dark, and still the orange glow of the streetlights catching the leaves of a tree I couldn't identify. I looked at it and listened to the sound of Patricia's breathing and the faint rustle of paper as she turned from the first page to the second. And I gave her the privacy of not watching her face while she read. I heard the exact moment she reached something that broke her open. It wasn't loud. It was the smallest sound, a single sharp intake of breath, like someone who has stepped into cold water. Then the sound of her trying to breathe normally and not being able to, the breath coming in increments jagged and shallow. I kept looking at the window. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then Patricia said very quietly, "Dad." I turned around. Her face was a wreck. Both eyes overflowing tears dropping off her jaw onto the paper she was holding her nose red, her mouth pressed into a shape that was trying to hold back something too large to hold. She was still sitting straight. She hadn't bent or crumpled. She was holding herself upright with everything she had while everything else poured out of her eyes, and it was one of the bravest things I had ever seen. She held the letter out toward me with a shaking hand. "Read the last part," she said. "Out loud, please." I took the pages from her carefully. Noah stirred slightly at the movement, but settled again. I found where she meant the final paragraph. Eleanor's handwriting slightly less steady there than at the start. The letters a little larger, the pressure on the pen a little lighter. The handwriting of someone who was tired, but determined to finish. I cleared my throat. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She writes, I began, and then I stopped because I had read these words before alone in our bedroom in Queens, on a night 3 years ago when I could not sleep. And they had undone me then, and they were going to undo me again now. And I had made a decision before I came on this trip that I was not going to let that stop me. I breathed in. I started again. She writes, My Patricia. I have been trying to find the right words for months, and I have decided that there are no right words, so I will just use the true ones instead. Your father is not a perfect man. He is stubborn and he works too hard, and he will fix a thing with his hands before he will ever talk about how it makes him feel. You know this. You grew up watching it. But here is what I also know and what I need you to know before I go. That man has never once, not once in 41 years, made me feel alone. Not when we had nothing. Not when we lost the baby before you were born. Not when I was sick and frightened and could not say so out loud. He just showed up. Every single time. That is not a small thing, Patricia. That is everything. Don't let anyone convince you that his love is a burden. It is the least burdensome thing I have ever known in my life. Find your way back to him. Whatever it takes, whatever has come between you, find your way back. Do it for me. Do it for Noah. But mostly do it for yourself because you are going to need him, and he is going to need you. And that is what family is. That is all family ever is. I stopped reading. My voice had been steady through most of it, and then not steady at the end, and I did not try to hide the difference. Patricia had both hands pressed over her face. Her shoulders were heaving, and she was crying the way I had not heard her cry since she was a little girl, fully without restraint. Without the adult armor of composure and control, just the pure grief and love and relief of it pouring out of her all at once. Noah woke up at the sound of it, lifted his head from her shoulder, and looked at her face with wide, frightened eyes. "Mom." His voice was high with alarm. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, baby." Patricia pulled him against her with one arm, the pages of the letter crackling between her fingers. "I promise. Nothing's wrong. I'm very happy and very sad at the same time, and sometimes that's what it looks like." Noah looked at the letter in her hand. Then he looked at me. "Was that from Grandma Eleanor?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He thought about this. Then he leaned back against his mother and pulled her arm tighter around himself and said with the simple certainty of a child who has decided something, "She was really smart, wasn't she, Grandpa?" It was not a question. "Yes," I said. My voice was completely gone by then. "She was the smartest person I ever knew." Patricia lifted her head. Her eyes were devastated and luminous, at the same time the way eyes get after a very long cry, washed clean every feeling right there at the surface with nowhere left to hide. She looked at me across the table with Noah tucked against her side, and she reached her free hand across the table toward me. I put mine in hers. Her fingers were cold, and she gripped hard the way people grip when they mean it. And I gripped back the same way, and we stayed like that at the kitchen table in Beverly Hills at midnight, with Eleanor's letter between us and Noah warm and sleepy against his mother's side. "I don't know how to start fixing this," Patricia said. Her voice was raw and honest, and more hers than anything she had said all day. "I genuinely don't know where to begin." "Yes, you do," I said. She shook her head. "You already started," I said. "Tonight. An hour ago when you told Linda to leave your house. That was the beginning." I tightened my grip on her hand slightly. "The rest is just what comes after the beginning." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she laughed, a real one sudden and slightly waterlogged, surprised out of her. It lasted only a second before it turned back into tears, but it was there. And it was real, and it changed the temperature of the room the way laughter does. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad." "Okay," I said. Noah looked between us with the expression of someone who has not understood everything that happened tonight, but understands enough. He reached across with his small hand and placed it on top of our joined ones. his mother's hand and mine, and patted it twice. "Okay," he said in a voice that was mostly sleep. I woke up before the sun. Old habit. 30 years of construction sites had wired something into me that no amount of retirement had been able to rewire. The body simply decides it is time to be awake. And that is the end of the discussion. I lay in the guest room for a few minutes listening to the Beverly Hills quiet, which was a different kind of quiet than Queens quiet. No garbage trucks, no neighbors starting cars, no Mr. Kowalski next door letting his dog out and talking to it like it understood English. Just the low hum of expensive silence and the distant sound of a sprinkler system somewhere on the block. I got up, found my way to the kitchen, and started on the coffee. Noah appeared in the doorway 7 minutes later in his pajamas, hair flattened on one side, eyes still half closed, a condition I recognized as the Reed family version of mourning. "I smelled the coffee," he said, which was impossible given that it had barely begun to brew, but children have their own logic about these things. "Sit down," I said. "You want some toast?" "I want to make the pie," he said. He was suddenly more awake. He straightened up in the door and looked at me with the particular focus of a child who had been thinking about something since before he fell asleep. "You said you'd teach me. Last night you said you would." I hadn't said exactly that, but I had implied it, and with 10-year-olds implications are binding contracts. "You remember what goes in first," I said. "Flour," he said immediately, "and butter. Cold butter. You said it has to be cold, or the crust gets tough." He had been paying attention on the back steps yesterday, apparently, when I had mentioned it in passing. Children absorb more than adults give them credit for and forget less. "All right," I said. "Wash your hands?" He was at the sink before I finished the sentence. We worked side by side at the counter, Noah on a step stool he had dragged in from the pantry, without being asked, his small hands working the butter into the flour with more enthusiasm than technique. I guided him through it, the way Eleanor had guided me the first time she had let me help her 30 years ago in a kitchen smaller than this one. Slow down, feel when it's right. Don't rush the cold out of it. "Like this," Noah said, holding up a handful of dough that was mostly correct. "Exactly like that," I said, even though it needed another 30 seconds. There is a time for precision and a time for encouragement. And with a 10-year-old at 7 in the morning, the latter is almost always more valuable. He beamed. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Light ones, careful, the footsteps of someone trying not to announce themselves. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the dough and let Noah walk me through his theory about why the butter had to be cold, which involved an explanation that was scientifically imprecise but emotionally invested. And I listened to the sound of Patricia stopping in the kitchen doorway and not coming in. She stood there for a while. I could feel her there the way you feel someone watching a particular quality of attention, warm and weighted. Noah hadn't noticed her yet. He was too focused on pressing the dough into the pie dish with his thumbs, his tongue slightly out, his brow furrowed with the concentration of someone performing surgery. I glanced sideways at him. "You're doing great, buddy." "I know," he said, which made me smile so hard I had to look away. I heard Patricia move, the soft sound of her stepping into the kitchen, the scrape of a chair, the sound of her sitting down at the table. A moment later, the coffee maker clicked off, and she got up again and poured herself a cup without asking where anything was. She sat back down. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Noah said, not looking up from the pie dish. "Morning," I said. That was the whole of it. 3 words. And it was enough. We moved through the next 20 minutes in the kind of easy quiet that is different from the heavy quiet of last night. This was the quiet of people who have said what needed saying and can now simply exist in the same room without it costing anything. Noah asked approximately 47 questions about apple pie, ranging from the genuinely practical to the deeply philosophical. Patricia drank her coffee and watched and occasionally answered one before I could. The kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon and butter, and something that was not quite either of those things but was made of both. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it. Maggie Torres. 7:42 in the morning, New York time. I stepped out into the hallway and picked up. "You're up early," I said. "I'm always up early." Her voice was exactly the same as it was in my kitchen yesterday morning, warm and direct, and entirely without preamble. "How'd it go?" I leaned against the hallway wall and looked back through the kitchen doorway at Noah pressing apple slices into the pie dish with complete seriousness, while Patricia watched him with an expression I had not seen on her face all yesterday, unguarded, soft, the expression of a woman who has put something down that she had been carrying for too long. "It went," I said. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then, "That good or that bad?" "Both," I said. "And then better." She exhaled the long exhale of someone who has been holding their breath since the day before. "Eleanor would say I told you so." "Eleanor would absolutely say that." "Are you all right, Frank?" I watched Noah hold up a finished section of pie lattice for Patricia's inspection, his face bright with pride. Patricia said something I couldn't hear, and Noah's grin spread so wide it took over his whole face. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." I went back into the kitchen and took up my position at the counter, and Noah immediately handed me a strip of dough to place, because he had decided that we were equal partners in this enterprise, and I had no objection to that arrangement. Patricia's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. The expression on her face went through several things in quick succession: recognition, then the tightening of something around her eyes, then a stillness that was not peace but decision. She read the message. I did not ask what it said. I kept my eyes on the lattice strip in my hand and placed it across the pie and smoothed the edge down with my thumb the way Eleanor had shown me. A few seconds passed. Then Patricia placed her phone face down on the table, not pushed aside, not set down absently, placed deliberately. The screen against the wood, the back of it facing up the message, and whoever sent it and whatever it demanded turned away from the room. She picked up her coffee mug with both hands. Noah looked up from the pie dish. "Mom, come see. Grandpa says I did the lattice right." Patricia stood up from the table. She crossed the kitchen and stood between us at the counter and looked at the pie dish and put her arm around Noah's shoulders. "That's beautiful, baby," she said, and she meant it, and she did not look at her phone again. The cab to LAX came at 10:30. Patricia had insisted on riding with me, which meant Noah had insisted on coming too, which meant all three of us were in the back of a gray sedan moving through late-morning Los Angeles traffic with the pie, the finished pie lattice top, and all sitting in a box on Noah's lap, because he had decided it was coming with us, and nobody had argued. "You could keep it," I told him. "I know," he said. "But you made it. You should have some too." I did not trust my voice to respond to that, so I looked out the window instead. LAX was its usual controlled chaos: rideshares stacked 4 deep at the curb, carts piled with luggage, a family of 6 trying to collapse a stroller while blocking most of the sidewalk. The cab pulled to the curb at Terminal 5, and we climbed out into the bright California morning, and the three of us stood on the sidewalk, with my carry-on between us and the pie box in Noah's arms, and the sun already warm on our shoulders. I checked my bag at the curb. Then there was nothing left to do but go. Noah hit me first, both arms around my waist, face pressed hard into my jacket, the way he had hit me at the front door 2 days ago. Except this time, he did not let go. I felt him breathing against my side fast and deliberate, the way children breathe when they are trying not to cry and have not yet decided if they are going to win that particular battle. "Grandpa," he said into my jacket. "I know, buddy. You promised. I know. You said you wouldn't disappear again." I put both arms around him and held on. My throat had closed completely. I breathed through it and kept my arms steady and let him take whatever time he needed. "I'm not going to disappear," I said. "I promise you that. Not again." He held on for another long moment. Then he pulled back and looked up at me with wet eyes and a chin that was working hard to stay level, and he thrust the pie box toward me with both hands. "You take it," he said fiercely. "So you have something from us when you get home." I took the box. Noah stepped back and wiped his face with the sleeve of his sweatshirt, one hard swipe the way boys do when they have decided the crying portion of events is concluded. I looked at Patricia. She was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, the familiar posture. Except this morning it was different. This morning it was not armor. It was just a woman standing in the California sun, holding herself together because the alternative was falling apart on a public sidewalk, and Patricia Calloway Reed had never fallen apart on a public sidewalk in her life. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and she looked more like Eleanor than she had in years. "Call me when you land," she said. "I will. I mean it. The moment you land." "Patricia." I stepped toward her. "I know." She unfolded her arms and put them around me, and I held my daughter on the sidewalk outside LAX with the pie box in one hand and the California sun on my back, and she said into my shoulder quietly, so only I could hear, "I'm going to fix it, Dad. I already called someone this morning, a family attorney." She pulled back and looked at me directly. "I'm going to fix it." "I know you will," I said. She reached into her jacket pocket and pressed something into my free hand, small folded. I closed my fingers around it without looking at it. "Don't open it until you're on the plane," she said. I nodded. I went through the doors. Security. The gate, the long walk down Terminal 5 that smelled like every airport I had ever been in. I found my seat on the plane window, same as coming out, and stowed the pie box in the overhead bin with more care than I had given my carry-on. I sat down and buckled my seatbelt and looked out the window at the LAX tarmac baking in the noon sun. I opened the folded paper. It was the drawing. Noah's drawing from the garden 2 days ago, the two figures in front of the small house with the red door, the uneven capital letters above them. Our family. Patricia had taken it from my shirt pocket last night while I slept and kept it and given it back. I sat with it in my hands while the plane filled around me. The engines came up. The city began to fall away beneath us. The highways, the rooftops, the brown hills going golden in the midday light. I watched LA get smaller until it was just a shimmer at the edge of the Pacific, and then it was gone. I folded the drawing along its original creases and placed it in my shirt pocket. Right over my heart, where it had been before. Queens smelled like Queens. Car exhaust and someone's dinner, and the particular dampness of autumn leaves breaking down on the sidewalk. Nothing like Beverly Hills, nothing like the clean, expensive air of that neighborhood, and I had never in my life been so glad to smell anything. The cab dropped me at the corner of Parsons Boulevard, and I walked the half block to the house with my carry-on and the pie box and the drawing in my shirt pocket, and I stood in front of my front door for a moment before I unlocked it. Same red door. Same crack in the second porch step that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Same wind chime Eleanor had hung the spring before she got sick, still turning in the October air. I went inside. The house was exactly as I had left it. The coffee cup rinsed and upside down in the drying rack, the recipe card propped against the backsplash, where I had forgotten to put it away. The kitchen smelling faintly of cinnamon from yesterday morning. I set the pie box on the counter. I hung up my jacket. 3 knocks at the front door. Maggie was standing on the porch with a covered dish, her coat buttoned to the top. Her expression, the one she used when she was pretending she hadn't been watching for the cab. "I made Eleanor's apple pie," she said. "Thought you might need it when you got back." I looked at her, then at the covered dish, then back at her. "I also have an apple pie," I said. "I know." She walked past me into the house. "Now you have 2. We sat at the kitchen table with both pies and 2 mugs of coffee and the October afternoon going golden through the window above the sink, and I told her what had happened. Not all of it, some of it was Patricia's and Noah's, and I would keep it for them, but enough. Maggie listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without the small sounds people make when they want you to know they are engaged. She just listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "When Eleanor always said Patricia would find her way back," she said. "She said it the last week in the hospital. She said, 'Frank, that girl is going to get lost for a while, but she knows where home is.'" My chest tightened so hard I had to set my mug down. She was right. I managed. She was always right. Maggie said it matter-of-factly, without sentiment, which was the most respectful thing she could have said. That's what made her so irritating. I laughed. A real one, sudden and full, the first real laugh in 3 days, and it felt like something releasing in my chest that had been wound tight for a very long time. My phone rang. "Patricia." "Dad." Her voice was steady and clear, the courtroom voice, the voice of a woman who has made a decision and is past the making of it. "I filed today, the divorce papers, and I called the family attorney about Noah. She says we can apply for temporary relocation to New York while the case is pending. It'll take a couple of months, but she thinks we have a strong case." I stood up from the table and walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the back garden. The apple tree Eleanor had planted the year Noah was born was dropping its last leaves. The garden was mostly bare now, the way it got in October, everything going quiet and brown and ready for winter. "Patricia," I said. "Yeah, Dad?" "I'm proud of you." A long pause. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then her voice came back, and it was not the courtroom voice anymore. It was smaller than that and more real. I love you, Dad," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find my way back." "You're back now," I said. "That's what matters." After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. The garden, the bare apple tree, the October light going copper on the back fence. My eyes filled up, not the burning kind from the last 3 days, not the kind that came from pain or shock or the effort of holding things together. This was different. This was the kind that comes when something you have been carrying for a very long time is finally quietly set down. I let it come. Maggie appeared at my elbow. She didn't say anything. She just stood there beside me and looked out at the garden, the way old friends stand beside each other, close enough to be present without needing to perform it. After a while, she said, "So, what are you going to plant out there this spring?" I wiped my eyes with the back of my wrist. "Apple trees," I said. "Definitely apple trees." 8 months later, Patricia and Noah moved into an apartment 12 minutes from my house in Queens. Every Sunday morning, the 3 of us make apple pie together. Noah no longer needs the step stool. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what I should have done differently. I should have knocked on that door in person. I should have spoken up sooner instead of calling week after week and hoping. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the birthday party and a trash can to find out how much has broken beneath the surface. I believe God puts the right people in our lives at the right moment, and sometimes He lets things fall apart so something truer can be built in its place. Here is what I know. Now, family stories, revenge is not found in confrontation or payback. Real family drama revenge is outlasting the people who tried to erase you by still being there, still loving, still showing up. That is the only family stories revenge worth having. That is the only family drama revenge that ever truly heals. If this story reached something inside you, a call you have been putting off, a door you have been afraid to knock on, please don't wait another day. Leave a comment. Share this story. Subscribe to this channel, because the next story might be exactly what someone you love needs to hear. Thank you sincerely for watching until the very end. Upcoming stories on this channel contain some fictional elements, crafted solely to carry a meaningful human message. If that is not the content for you, we completely understand. Please feel free to find what speaks to your heart.